Good day, everyone, and warm welcome to this week's MIU session. My name is Nico Zantop, and I'm honored to serve you as a moderator for today. I'm joined by my head of department, Christoph Burmeister. He's an expert in sea traffic and nautical solutions, and he will be delivering an insightful presentation on remote pilotage and the motivation and relevance for digital boarding. Before we proceed with the presentation, I would like to remind you, everyone, that this session is being recorded. To ensure maximum clarity, we kindly asked that all microphones and cameras be turned off during the presentation. If you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to post them in the chat, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Now, without further ado, I would like to turn over the floor to Christoph. Christoph, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Nico, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here again and give some insights about our remote pilotage activities. That's actually the start of a small series which we are going to have here. Today is the first part where we speak a little bit about the motivation and relevance for remote pilotage, or digital boarding, as we also sometimes try to call it. And then I will say later on in the next weeks, you will get a little bit more insights into some of the alternatives that we see here. But first of all, let's maybe stick to the fact why this is relevant and why we spend our time and efforts to look for innovative solutions on that area. So first of all, what is pilotage? Just as a short reminder, I guess most of the people that are in here are more or less aware of the fact. It's not just to be in these nice, small, cozy boats in the sun shines, but maritime pilot is an officially licensed professional advisor, which is necessary for local and nautical skills to guide the ships, that specifically during port approaches and in very constrained waters. It's not part of the ship's crew, but it is something that is very mandatory and also compulsory that we find all around the world. That definition here is from the German Sea Pilotage Act, but there are similar ones in other occasions as well. And at least according to today, and that's also the status from IMPER, there is no substitute for the presence of a qualified pilot on board the bridge. So it is a task that is happening on board of the bridge, where you're advising the local crew in selective waters. So the situation today is you need to execute that on board the vessels, and that primarily means that you need to get on board the vessels, because if you have a 2 or 3 week travel from Europe to Australia or to America, of course, you don't want to keep the pilot on board all the time. So there are certain boarding principles which we are using today. Most typical one is a pilot letter. Alongside, we will see some pictures later on. There's accommodation letters and pilot letters in combination. Sometimes you can entrance through side doors. You often find that maybe, for example, on ferries, which are regularly traveling. Or there's also boarding by helicopters, which we've seen in several locations, which is also a very interesting task to do. That's, of course, all physical. What we want to say now, if we discuss remote pilotage, is that we don't want to question the need for a pilot's advice. So that's something that we also fully acknowledge. And that's needed for safe and efficient shipping. But we see this maybe as the fifth boarding principle, or as a way that you could connect the pilot with the ship crew on board. Why is that relevant? There are basically two societal or two major things that we need to look upon. And the first thing we want to look up is safety. And if we speak about safety today, I don't mean safety of traffic or of maritime traffic in general, because that's something that the pilot ensures. But I speak primarily about worker safety, so about the pilot itself. So here's a picture. I think that's a pilot door, not a pilot ladder at the end of the day, where you see pilot boats arriving the vessel middle of the night, and then you need to make a handover. So one of the major things is that the pilots need to go on board and, of course, also off board again if they are assisting during leaving. There's a regulation of that. That's SOLAS Regulation 23, which basically forms the same the basic requirements for pilot transfer agreements. And as you can see from recent studies, there is, let's say, certainly a high degree of non-compliant boarding arrangements, specifically for the ladders. And as you can see, I mean, the picture on the right-hand side looks very nice, and that's of course something which looks good for movies, but you don't want to go there in high waves, and then that's becoming a high personal risk. So the transfer of pilots on board is something where there's a certain safety risk involved, and that's nothing that we just have in certain areas on the world, but of course that we see in all regions. This, unfortunately, also leads to the fact that during pilot boarding, the fatalities is something that we see around the world. So we don't just speak about injuries, but real fatalities. And I think within Europe, we had 2 major accidents this year already in Hamburg and also in Muiden even. So it was just a pilot crew transfer person and not the pilot itself in Muiden, which had that problems. But we also see that in other areas of the world that pilots fell off board and are then either getting seriously injured or even die from time to time, which is of course something that is not acceptable and aspired at the end of the day. Thus, we need to conclude that there's a certain, let's say, job worker risk associated with that profession. Let me put it like that. Pilots are aware of that and are also taking that for granted, and of course, nevertheless, try to execute their jobs to ensure safety of maritime traffic overall. But for them individually, that's of course something where we tend to look for a solution how that can be improved. One second thing that we would like to highlight a bit is the area of sustainability and the road for net zero, which is becoming more and more present. And that's something related to the fact that, of course, for boarding vessels, you need to transfer them either by additional boats, so like the pilot boats here, or even by the helicopters itself. That's a side effect that we want to look up at. So in case you need to board a vessel, there's not really an alternative to do it like that. But what we can also see is if we look, for example, at the speed profiles in the Baltic, and we did some AIS analytics here with data from 2019 with the pilot vessels, you of course see that due to the nature of the operation, those vessels need to operate on very high speeds. So it's often above 20 knots where they are operating in. And you see here a map, I think that's all travels and missions from AIS statistics from pilot boats in 2019. And if you use some rough estimations, that's of course also corresponds to an additional emission of CO2 in that area, which is annually approximately the equivalence of 5,000 cars per year. Again, let me highlight, that's of course a side effect. If you need to board, that's a necessity, but that can of course also be something that can be alternatively chosen. What is not shown here is the additional effects of helicopter transfers, so that would even come on top of them. So what we have seen is that besides the fact that advising the crew on board is very important and needed, there are certain effects related to how that boarding is happening today. And that's on the one hand the worker safety, but on the other hand also some environmental effects, which is why we look into modern means that technology can provide to still help executing that advice, but maybe also in a different way to ensure some risk mitigation. And I will not go into all the details here yet, but what we see currently on what's evolving in the maritime world is, of course, a lot of technology that can help us building blocks for enabling remote pilotage solutions and thus a digital boarding in the future. And there's on the one hand, of course, these emerging remote control centers, which start as fleet control centers for For the cruise liner industries, nowadays it's getting into productization status, even for these whole trend about autonomous surface vessels, which I don't want to discuss here any further. But there's a lot of technology and development in a mature, stable product way out there nowadays that can also feed in here. Plus, maritime communication is actually improving quite a lot. I know that there are still issues outside, but specifically coastal waters, specifically also in northerly and westerly world, it's getting better and better. So we have two main technologies that can assist in enabling those technology solutions in the long run. Plus, we have one thing that is entering the maritime field of view, and that's the area of mixed reality, which seems to be a kind of an intuitive way to transfer also situational awareness among different places, and thus can also hope to cope that additional way. So what is the conclusion for today, or why are we looking into that? So the motivation for remote pilotage as a tool or alternative in the future is primarily the operational safety, I would say. So if you look at those facts, of course, we want to achieve more safety for the pilots without reducing the safety of maritime traffic overall. What we have seen there is that, of course, pilot boarding arrangements are a certain risk. There are accidents involved with the transfer to and from the vessels, specifically in harsh weather conditions, which is specifically the time when pilotage is needed the most. So that's one field where we, at least in the first idea, consider that accessing the vessel remotely might be a more safer way that still allows you to execute that job. As a side effect, we also have the sustainability aspects, which is coming more and more present, as well as by helicopter or high-speed transfer vessels. The transfer itself is creating further emissions, where we might find an alternative. Again, if we need to transfer, that's a necessity, but maybe there's a fifth and alternative mean. And therefore, it's important for us to stress that remote pilotage and those technologies, it's not about making pilotage itself obsolete. So the task itself and the advice is very, very important, but it's about inventing and looking into technology, how you could provide pilots further or more virtual means to execute their task in assisting the onboard vessels crew in a more safer way in the future. That is what we are currently investigating here at Fraunhofer CML, but also very much together with our colleagues from the Fraunhofer Innovation Platform for Smart Shipping at Novia University in Finland, and where we now started to look into different kind of prototypes and technologies, how those things can be achieved in the future. For those who are a bit more interested in some of the details, there will be an open access paper available on that in November, which will also presented during the ICMAS conference, as well as during the Europort trade fair in Rotterdam in 2 weeks' time. But you can, of course, also watch next week's sessions again here to see a little bit more into the details. That would be today from my end, to give you a little bit about an introduction and a motivation why we think remote pilotage is a technology worth to investigate. And of course, I'm now very much open for your further questions and remarks. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Christoph, for your enlightening presentation to the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat or unmute your microphone. In the meantime, I have a question to propose. What is the current legal situation regarding remote pilotage?
Yeah, the current legal regulation is, of course, primarily it needs to be executed on board the vessel. Pilotage is normally regulated in national regulations. What we, however, see now is that they are the first countries opening up their legislation for remote pilotage approaches. One of the prime examples is Finland here, which changed their Pilotage Act a few years ago and now at least foresee capabilities to execute remote pilotage. I think that was also unfortunately motivated by a tragic incident they had a few years back in time with a pilot transfer vessel. There are changes going on. Additionally, we also have to acknowledge that some part of remote pilotage are already taking place for quite a long time. That's, for example, if we look here into Germany, you have radar pilotage on the Elbe River. That's an additional service that the pilots on board can take support from shore-based pilots. I would say for pure remote pilotage, the legislation is in most countries not there yet, with Finland being one of the front runners on those kind of things. But that's something that need to be driven then to get that forward.
Thank you. There's a question from the audience. So has this approach already been presented, discussed to the German Pilot Association representatives?
Let me put it like that. Of course, I think the German brotherhoods are also aware of the fact about remote pilotage research. Frankly speaking, that's also nothing that we have invented here, but that's around research for, I think, at least 20 years. Meanwhile, what we will show next week is one potential approach how that can be helped. That's not officially together with the German brotherhoods or pilotage brotherhoods, so I can't speak for them. But of course, we are in exchange with them and show what we are driving forward there at the moment, because they would be one of the end users at the end of the day.
Maybe I can add some information in here because, hi, I'm Alresh Ulkani. I'm also from the Fraunhofer and I'm currently working on the project. And I have been in talks with German pilots, and I think the biggest issue in this regard is always the situational awareness. If everything they get on board can be presented also on the land side, and also things like, okay, how is the crew behaving? How is are they running around on the ship stack? And this is these are informations which you can't just represent with camera data. So they want the human to human interaction must be in some kind presented for them to be completely fine with it. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So I think there's a question from the audience.
That's Klaus Hohler from Jade Hochschule, Department of Maritime and Logistics Studies at Elfleet. A few weeks ago, there was an accident on the River Weser near Fegesack, where the pilot told the captain to give more speed for nautical reasons, and the captain said no. The ship owner said it's difficult with our emission. I cannot give more speed. So the question is, in addition to the question before, does the presence of a person on board be more impressive than a person on the screen to push through the ideas of the pilot?
That's of course something that might need to be watched upon. I think in principle, yes, there you will have a certain effect on that. But at the end of the day, also I would say the whole issue is of course very much about the master-pilot exchange as well as the trust building among the two of them. You know as well as me that the pilot itself has no enforcing capability on board, regardless if he is on board or if he's giving advice from the outside. If the captain is, due to whatever reason, not willing to accept those, that will not change. I guess it might be a realistic case, which I can't fully assess now, is that, of course, the trust building issue is that's something that is a bit more complicated on the distance than if you would have persons on board. However, I doubt that you will get rid of those situations completely at the end of the day. I would, however, also doubt that this will become a major additional source of accidents in the long run. So I think it's presumably one problem in that setup that one might need to accept at the end of the day.
Yes, and in addition, when the education of pilots is changing to a study master course with less experience on board, then the trustworthiness of a pilot, in addition to distance communication, might increase.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, that change, I mean, now it's getting in a little bit another topic, but the change within the education, at least in Germany, is something that we are already having. I mean, also pilots have the issue that the problem with recruitment of new people is getting more complicated. Yeah, of course, trust building into that team is something where we will experience changes in the long run, regardless of going if we go into that direction of technology or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good.
So we hope you have enjoyed this week MIU session. Please note that we will be back next week with the second part about remote pilotage. And you will get some insight in the RepoMan project and the technical approach. And also you will have like a MIU on the spot where you will see the onboard tests. Once again, thank you, Christoph, for your presentation, and to all of us who've been with us today. We wish you a nice weekend and hope to see you next time.
Thanks, Nico. And to all of you, have a nice weekend as well. Bye-bye.